Hello and welcome back. Happy fall to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our discussion about jumpstarting our spring gardens. We're excited to be back with you after a couple of months off. My name is Kathleen Hennessy and I work with Monrovia's PR agency. I'll be introducing our experts from Monrovia in just a bit, but as always, we have just a few details to cover with you. We are recording today's session and you'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording in the next day or so. So if you miss anything during the discussion, don't worry, you'll be able to refer to the recording. Your cameras are turned off and you are muted, so we can't see or hear you, but we do want you to participate. You can ask questions at any time during our discussion by typing them into the Q&A section in your Zoom control panel. We have our plant experts from Monrovia here to help answer questions, and we also hope to answer a few of those questions live at the end of the discussion. We will have another opportunity for you to take part today. That is in our poll question. We're going to be asking you what projects you're hoping to take on this fall. So one last reminder that we will send you an email with a link to the recording of today's discussion, and that email will also have plant information on everything that is talked about today. So with that, let's introduce our experts. If you've been with our part of our webinars for a while now, you may already know Katie Tammany. Katie's official title is Chief Marketing Officer, but she really is our Chief Storyteller and Trend Spotter at Monrovia. Katie has more than 25 years of experience in lifestyle and leisure industries, and she's the former editor of Sunset Magazine and a longtime avid gardener with specific interest in the connections between garden, art, health, and well-being. When it comes to fall planting, Katie, you had said you are looking to add some interesting foliage plants to your garden, right?
Yes, I have been a longtime admirer of a plant that Monrovia grows exclusively called Fatsia camouflage. And it was a little hard to find, last year, but I finally have it and I'm ready to plant.
Sounds great. Many of you also know Georgia Clay. Georgia is part of the new plants team at Monrovia, and Georgia works with breeders and plant finders around the world to bring new plants to market. These plants come from all over the world, and then they're trialed and tested at Monrovia nurseries around the country for several years before they're available at your local garden center. And Georgia, you said you tend to think about evergreens for fall planting. Anything on your wish list this season?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Pittosporum. I think they add a really nice, airy texture to the garden and still evergreen. So I've got two, either Tasman Ruffles or our new one, which is Gold Coast, if I can find it, Katie.
Sounds good. We are excited about today's discussion. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to hand it off to Katie to kick things off.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome back to our series, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful summer, enjoying your garden. And so let's talk about jumpstarting your garden. We're going to talk a little bit about, fall and some immediate things that you can have in your garden, but really we're thinking about what a great time it is to establish plants that will really take off in spring. But to Kathleen's point about our poll, we'd like to ask you what you're thinking about in terms of projects right now. Front yards and pathway borders, maybe. We know that our subscribers have been telling us that they're planning on doing a lot of front yard projects this coming year. Or maybe you're interested in, some updated containers, window boxes, something for the season. Perhaps you're thinking about small statement trees, specimens, things that, like I think about Japanese maples as a wonderful statement tree. And maybe those things are going in your backyard. I know in the poll choices we gave you, it's front yard, backyard, or containers. And which one are you thinking about? So looks like front yard is the leader right now. Which really that matches what we've heard from our email subscribers. So that's pretty interesting. But backyard's not far behind either. And I actually think, wow, it's pretty great that you're wanting to take on some significant outdoor spaces, not just fall containers. So that leads perfectly into what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so now we've got the results 45% of you said front yard, 40% backyard, 15% containers. All right. Well, hopefully you'll find a little bit of everything in what we're going to talk about today. Oops. Let me see if I can go forward. There we go. So what are we going to discuss today? Going to talk about why plant now for spring. I think if you're here, you know that a little bit already, but let's go over some of the main points. Some key trends that are shaping our gardens, influences that might be kind of fun for you to be aware of. Let's talk about front yards in particular and some really wonderful plant choices to put in right now. Awkward spaces, we all have them. And those could be places that are in your front yard. Maybe it's next to a pathway, you know, that area is sort of the pathway to the driveway, that sometimes there's a pocket of space that you don't really know what to do with. We'll talk about what plants that are really wonderful when planted in mass or in a group. And then we've got some key plants just to kind of treat yourself for the season. So let's jump in. And just talk about, you know, why are we talking about spring? You know, fall is all around us, but why is it important to get, especially your shrubs and trees, in the ground right now? Well, for one reason, you know, the temperature is perfect. Not just the air temperature for plants, but the temperature of your soil is great to get roots established now in the garden, and really encouraging root growth. You know, now, you know, the rains will be coming to help further establish those roots, and that's going to enable your plants to grow in a bit, you know, before spring, before you're adding perennials, annuals. You know, you can really get those plants going. I think for me right now, I am conditioning my soil heavily right now, bringing in, you know, more compost. I'll be mulching around my plants in the fall. But Georgia, anything else you would add to why think about spring right now?
Well, I think you really nailed it. If you plant it now, you think you get that reward in the spring. Your plants, like you mentioned, just are already primed and ready to go. Their roots are established, which means they're able to hold on to more water in the spring and the summer as things start to heat up. And that's always going to be better for your plants.
All right. So a couple things to be thinking about as we're thinking about spring are some trends that we have been following, you know, for a while, seeing what designers, professional designers are doing in the landscape, and also what is resonating with our followers, both on our social media and email and on our blog. And through those insights, we have identified 3 key trends that would be good to talk about today. So one is what we call the Garden of Abundance, this idea of creating your very own Garden of Eden. Strong interest in fruit trees continues. We're seeing a lot of interest in things like figs and persimmons, and then, you know, exotic fruits like kiwi. And a lot of interest in what we call edible perennials, you know, shrubs that you can plant for their beauty and ornament as well as productivity. And then definitely part of this trend is also grasses, you know, great place for birds and wildlife to sort of tuck into, and then pollinator plants as well, pollinator perennials. So mixing all of those plants, herbs, you know, in your garden really makes it feel more productive and makes your garden feel like it's part of a greater world teeming with life. So in that trend, we've got some key plants that Georgia would be good to get established now.
Definitely. Yeah. We'll just kick things off. We have a brand new plant for 2024. Really excited about Bountiful Baby Blueberry. So this is a brand new one, as I mentioned, in the Bountiful collection, which Katie, you just mentioned this idea of plants that can be both edible and ornamental. And so that's really what this Bountiful collection is all about. And Bountiful Baby is no different. It's quite compact. It's going to be about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. Really well branched habit. It's not going to get those stems that are going to go all over the place and get really large and outgrow your space. And what I love is that in the fall and winter, it gets this really intense burgundy red foliage. So of course, it's beautiful ornamentally, but it does also produce a lot of berries, and they're quite oblong in shape, and they're really very sweet. So a really nice shrub for your edible gardens. And then of course, fall, perfect time to plant your fruit trees. Here we are showcasing one that's been around for a while. It's Santa Rosa Plum. This is known for its, sweet, slightly tart, deep purple fruit. It is self-pollinating, but of course, with any self-pollinating fruit, if you want more fruit, a pollinator is not a bad idea. But this is great for edibles, but then again, ornamentals, because in the spring, you're going to get those beautiful blush white flowers. And then, Katie, you mentioned figs, and we all know the fig trees, but the fig nominal is a new one that is more of a dwarf shrub. So that's rather interesting for a fig. It's a miniature. It's going to be about 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide. Great for containers, great for your small spaces, and a really interesting plant with, again, those lovely fig fruits. Grasses, another one, switchgrass, is a native grass of the Americas. It's great for overwintering birds, bees, and other pollinators. Hot rod is a selection that has this really beautiful blue-green foliage during, spring and summer, and then in the fall and towards the end of the summer, it's going to go this deep burgundy color. So it's really quite dramatic, really great vertical interest, and once established, nice drought tolerance as well. Fall also can be a really nice time to plant your perennials. Echinacea, of course, a classic of this abundance garden. Panama Red is a new variety. It has brilliant, bright red flowers, just electrifying red. A really dark cone and then dark black stems. So it's really quite dramatic. There's loads of flowers and there's no need to stake. And then another cool perennial in this is colorburst yellow Cape fuchsia. And this is really excellent for attracting hummingbirds to the garden, which I personally love to do in my own garden. Cape fuchsias are super easy care. This particular variety is going to stay smaller than the typical species by about half. And so colorburst is going to be about 3 feet tall in the garden or so.
And that comes in several colors, right? Yellow, orange.
It does, and red and
Yeah.
pink.
Yeah. The coneflower, I think sometimes people struggle a little bit with coneflower in the fall, depending on, where they live and the weather that they're dealing with. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, we say fall is a nice time to plant perennials, and I would say it sort of depends on where you live with some things. So echinacea, lavender, all these sort of more drought tolerant plants, they really don't like wet feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you live in a climate like where I live, which has really wet winters, I save those sorts of plants for spring.
Okay.
But if you live in a drier winter climate, like where Kathleen lives in the Midwest,
Huh?
it would be a great time to plant those sort of perennials.
Great. That's really helpful. Okay, so another key trend that we're following is what we call the Garden of Romance. And I might even say the Garden of Romance and history, because this trend is all about bringing back some classic nostalgia plants. Maybe it's something that your grandmother grew, but now there's a version of it that stays more compact and is easier to maintain, more disease resistant. I'm thinking obviously about plants like roses, but also this includes peonies and lilacs and hydrangeas, of course, which are a favorite. And this trend is about using those flowering, shrubs with a mix of evergreen, plants too, and having a garden that feels maybe a little bit more formal. That's Oprah Winfrey's garden on the upper left there in Santa Barbara. And the one in the middle is a fantastic hotel in the Northeast. So this trend is also about picking up maybe inspiration from where you travel and bringing that back to your home garden. And certainly this is a great time to plant many of those classic shrubs.
Definitely. And a classic, as you mentioned, Katie, of course, hydrangea macrophyllus, big leaf hydrangeas. We really love Seaside Serenade Newport, that intense, deep, deep purple violet color. It really is unique to the marketplace and to your garden if you choose to plant this. What I really love about this plant also is it's naturally compact. So it's going to stay about 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. And it has stems that are super thick and sturdy, so they're not going to flop over. So even in full flower during those summer storms that can really decimate hydrangeas, these will really stay nice and tidy. The foliage itself is also pretty thick. And so, during those storms when the leaves can tatter, these leaves really hold up well in those strong winds, and they hold up also to wilting on summer days. So if it's really hot, you'll notice the leaves try to kind of look a little sad, and this is less likely to wilt on you. And then the flowers themselves are also really thick and almost leathery. And so what that does is it helps them last for a super long time. So you get not only a lot of flowers, but each flower is going to last upwards of 3 months on the plant, which is pretty incredible. They're going to bloom on old and new wood. So if you get a lot of stem dieback, if you plant in the fall and you get stem dieback for the winter, you can still get a bloom in next season. And we just really love this plant all around. Next is Roseanne cranesbill or Roseanne geranium. This is a classic. It's one of the longest blooming perennials you can find in the garden. Part of the reason it's so long blooming is that it doesn't set a seed. And so it puts all of its energy into producing flowers and just continues, from spring all the way into mid-fall. So it's quite prolific. This is from the breeder. His name is Adrian Bloom, and he's sort of a classic breeder. He runs a garden called Bressingham Gardens in the UK, and we're super lucky we've been able to work with him over the last few years, and we have got some really cool new perennials coming down the pipeline from him, which I'm really excited about. So stay tuned. And then, of course, roses, as you mentioned, perfect for this garden of romance. The Eau de Perfume series of roses, as you might imagine, was selected for their incredible fragrance. One thing about fragrant roses in the past is that they've been pretty prone to disease. And so they've not been the best garden shrub for a more modern garden looking for lower maintenance plants. So what we've been really focused on is bringing fragrance back into roses, but keeping disease resistance that we all know and love and expect from our roses now. And so this Eau de Perfume really does that well, and Bling has that gorgeous deep pink flower. And then next is evergreen like Magical Amore holly. This is a really great new holly. It's upright and columnar. So it's going to be, 7 feet tall and then maybe 3 feet wide. So you get this really nice upright evergreen hedge, great for the smaller gardens in need of some height, but without a lot of space to do it. And then of course it's a holly. So we like that bright red fruit in the fall that persists all throughout the winter. And then another evergreen for this is Sheer Genius Cotoneaster. This would be a great boxwood replacement if you're in an area where you're getting a lot of blight and still looking for an evergreen shrub that can maybe shear into a shape or be more formal. So this has really nice clean green foliage, and as I mentioned, it does shear really well, but naturally in habit it's going to be about 4 to 5 feet tall by 2 to 3 feet wide. So again, that sort of narrow upright plant in its natural form that's really lends itself well to the more modern garden. And then lastly is Daphne. Daphne's fabulous for the fragrant flowers that you get in late winter, early spring. So plant it now and you get to enjoy those coming right up. Banana split is really nice because it has bright yellow, super wide margins on the leaf. And what we've noticed is that a lot of these variegated Daphnes tend to revert. They tend to start with that yellow and green foliage and then they go green. And this banana split really hasn't done that. So it stays with that variegation quite nicely.
And it actually in person, it looks so like painterly, almost like watercolor strokes on the leaves. It's really, really pretty. While we have hydrangeas, up on the slide, Newport we love for its color, but is it a good idea, to add acid to your soil, like if you want that blue hydrangea in the spring, should you be thinking about that right now?
So I generally would recommend thinking about that in the spring.
Okay.
So as you're go to the garden center and they sell soil acidifiers, and typically in the spring when the plants just begin to wake up and grow is when you want to do it.
Okay.
And if you're particularly alkaline soils, you might want to do it, a few times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But really the spring. So plant them now and then keep it on your to-do list for the spring.
Got it. And then the Roseanne cranesbill. I actually have that in my garden, and that is also, you know, incredibly drought tolerant. I really neglect it, and it comes back beautifully every year. Okay, and then the third trend that we're following is the garden of relaxation. And we all, of course, turn to our gardens to relax, but this trend is about mixing texture, keeping the palette pretty soothing, as you can see from the plants that, I mean, the photos that I have up here. It's doesn't have a lot of bright colors. If you do have a pop of bright color, it's generally going to be a tropical plant, something that you tuck in to kind of remind you of, you know, vacations far away and that feeling of being in paradise. Ferns, hostas, larger leafed plants, really mixing textures helps create interest in a garden that's mostly, you know, greens. So this is a trend that has been growing, especially since the pandemic, when we started seeing how many people were reporting in our surveys that they were turning more and more to their garden to de-stress, to kind of escape. And so creating that sense of escape in your backyard by creating a feeling of being on vacation in some other location, that's really what this trend is about. And we definitely grow a lot of plants that fit this idea.
We do, yeah. And hostas, we grow a lot of hostas. And this Neptune is actually the hosta of the year for 2023. So it's a special one this year. It's got bright blue foliage that's going to emerge in the spring. And then over time, as the season progresses, it's going to go from bright blue to more of this beautiful glaucous blue-green color. So really soothing hue. It has large foliage. And it's highly rippled, so it gets a lot of
Yeah, I
texture.
love that. Love the ruffled edges there. It's really pretty.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat plant and really great for planting in mass around a garden like this. And then next is Angio tree ivy, Angio star tree ivy. This is a hybrid between Fatsia and English ivy, which is really cool. So it has ivy-like foliage, shades of greens and creams, but unlike ivy, it does not take root or spread really aggressively on your walls. So really useful plant here. It's great for full-time indoors. It also looks really beautiful trained up a wall or a pillar outside. It's evergreen. I also like to use this for indoor arrangements. Now you can cut the foliage and use it as filler for flowers, or even on its own. It's beautiful.
I feel like it plays well with so many other plants and in so many garden styles. You know, I know I talked about Fatsia camouflage, which I am going to plant, but this is a close second for me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful plant. And then next is flamethrower cercis. And I know we're keeping it muted and cool tones here, but we had to throw in this flamethrower. It's one of my favorite new trees that have come to market. The foliage emerges this deep burgundy red and then gradually ages to ambers and bright yellow and then into green. And that is all on one branch. So you can get, 4 or 5 different colors at a time on a single branch, which is really cool.
So striking. Yeah.
It's so striking in this photo. In person, it's hard to capture how cool this plant is. What I really love about this is an eastern redbud. So that's a North American native. They naturally are found between, stream banks all the way to dry rocky ridges. So it's really quite adaptable to anywhere that you want to put it. And then next is Lilla smokebush. Lilla is a fantastic compact variety. Instead of getting 15, 20 feet tall, like some of the other purple Catinus like Grace or Royal Purple, this Lilla is only going to get 4 feet tall. So you'll get that deep purple foliage in a much smaller package. Again, great for those modern gardens. And there's quite a soothing quality to those rounded dark leaves of Lilla. And then ginkgos are super cool trees with unusual texture, which I think would bring a lot to this type of garden. Jade butterfly is a selection here, and it's this dwarf selection. So it's going to mature to 12 to 15 feet tall with bright green foliage. And then in the fall, it turns golden yellow.
Mm.
And ginkgos sometimes get a bad reputation for having that stinky fruit. This is a male cultivar, so it does not fruit. It's seedless.
Right.
And then lastly, for a ton of texture is this asparagus plumosus. I call it the climbing asparagus fern because it does really climb up a support, which is super cool. It creates such a lush display vertically, and it has that soft, fine foliage. Great for containers both inside the house and outside the house.
Absolutely. I love just looking at the pattern and texture on this page makes me, really excited about possibilities. Um, so now that we've talked about some of the key trends that we're following and that might help you make selections for your garden, I wanted to talk about front yards in particular and what's going on in front yards. There's always going to be the need for those shrubs that kind of help conceal, maybe the front of your house a little bit, but that don't get too tall, that are really easy to maintain. And so George is going to talk about that. I think here in the West, we are seeing a lot of interest in a water-wise front yard, in moving away from the lawn and introducing plants that don't need, extra water, and that can really, thrive in harsh conditions, and in mixing in other materials in the front yard as well. Like you could see this sort of faux dry riverbed that a homeowner has created. And then the other trend that we're seeing a lot of is, back to this history idea, an interest in topiary and flowering shrubs, and creating a bit of structure for your front yard as well. So different trends at play here. And one other one that I think George is going to talk about is the interest that people are having in darker foliage plants. We've been seeing the phrase, I guess, goth gardens is one, but I tend to think of it as sort of the dark light garden, where you're interested in dark foliage and how that can help you set off beautiful blooms, whether that's in white or pink. So that brings us to a couple of your selections for front yards this season, Georgia.
Yes, and we are, of course, starting off with the goth garden. If you're looking for a 9-bark or physocarpus with dark foliage, Dark Star, as shown here on the top left, is one of the darkest that you will find. We trialed a lot of physocarpus, and this was by far the deepest and darkest. The color is fantastic, and the foliage is larger as opposed to some of the smaller foliage varieties. So it would look really nice in this sort of foundational shrub area. So really beautiful for movement in terms of texture, but also gets white flowers in the summertime, which is great for contrast. 9-bark is an amazing plant. It can tolerate a ton of different soil types. So whether that's droughty or wet, they really can do it all. And then another new plant with this rich, dark foliage is Cocoa Chill Weigelia. This is a low maintenance shrub full of color. It has that gorgeous dark purple foliage, an abundance of bright pink flowers. What we've noticed with Weigelia is that sometimes, although they are hardy to zone 4, they have a problem going to sleep in the winter, and they just keep growing and flowering right up until a frost, which can lead to some issues with overwintering and dieback in the spring. So not only did we choose this Cocoa Chill Weigelia for its rich foliage and flowers, but also for its improved hardiness. So it does continually flower, but then it does go to sleep, and we see it thriving in the spring. So less issues with overwintering.
Okay, got it.
And then next is Bright Star Yucca. That brilliant bright yellow foliage is a lovely contrast. It's a great architectural statement in the garden. Love the bright yellow, and it also gets this cast of pink in colder months, which is quite nice. And then another plant for architectural interest is a new one called Little Giant Hesperalo. This is brought to us from Savano Nursery, who is breeding out of the desert Southwest, which is pretty cool. This is a much smaller version of Hesperalo vinifera, which is really super popular in landscapes for the architecture that it brings to the garden. But the issue is that it quickly outgrows the space. And so it ends up getting too big. So Little Giant is a compact version of Hesperella vinifera. So it's only going to be about 4 feet tall, stays very manageable for the modern garden, and gives you that same architectural cool look. It can handle full-on reflective sun, low water. It's also an attractive pollinator plant. So lots of reasons.
It's got it all.
Mhm. And then next is a juniper. So juniper is really versatile. You get the upright junipers, you have shrubs. This is a ground cover type. It's called burly blue. Incredibly hardy down to zone 3. It has blue-green foliage that holds well throughout the year. Some junipers tend to green out and get rid of that blue, but burly blue tends to stay blue.
Yeah, it even would go in that sort of garden of relaxation for that reason. And I think junipers, especially where I am in Northern California, they get such a bad rap, and people are, pulling out the junipers that they, probably that were planted in their front yard from the 90s. But those are different. Those got like wildly out of control. And burly blue, I love the habit of it. I mean, it really is lower profile, kind of hugs the ground a little bit more. Really, really pretty.
Yeah, it's gorgeous plants, really versatile and useful. And then another versatile plant is this cream de mint, Pittosporum. So I mentioned in the beginning Pittosporum that we're tall, evergreen hedging, and this is a compact Pittosporum. So this is going to be about 2 feet tall or so and wide, so nice and small. And I really love that nice glossy minty green foliage with the white edge. So really nice companion plant for your colorful perennials that are going to pop up in the spring and summer.
Absolutely. This, like the tree ivy that we were talking about, I just find that this plant goes with everything, goes with every style garden, goes with every other color. Really, really a stunner. Okay, let's talk awkward spaces. We all have them in our garden. They could be parts of maybe your patio, area, or where your roof line is, coming into play. This is actually an example on the left is from our office up in Oregon, but you get the idea. Those little corners or nooks where you need something, to kind of catch the eye, but there's not a lot of planting space around it. And then the other awkward space that many of us have is that spot, between the driveway and, the front door. And so what do we do with that? And Georgia, we have some ideas, things that can really like capture your attention, catch your eye, and kind of transform the most awkward space.
Yeah, we do. So ground covers can do a really good job of this. I'm a big fan of ground covers. Little Gecko is a sedum that's perfect for bringing in some life into these spots. It has beautiful, bright, variegated foliage. And again, we talked about with the Daphne about variegated foliage can sometimes go green. And we don't like that. We want it to stay nice and bright and be yellow and green. And Little Gecko has done that. It stays variegated. It stays really nice. Drought tolerant, and pink flowers in the summer means that you get a lot of seasons of interest here. And then moving on is Golden Child Arborvitae, or Thuya. And this is one of my favorite plants. I know that it's a Thuya and people might not be enthused about it, but I really think this is a great plant. It is a perfect, 2 foot tall by 2 foot wide ball of golden foliage. In the fall and the winter, it takes on these shades of burnt orange and bronze. And what I really love about it is its sun tolerance and its ability to withstand full-on sun with no burn, even with that beautiful golden foliage. So we saw this in our trials. And when we were trialing this, we had a super intense heat wave. We were above 105 for 3 or 4 days in a row. Unfortunately, the trials got maybe no water, but I'm going to assume maybe a little bit of water. And I came back to the trials and everything was burnt. All the golden foliage Thuya, everything was burnt, and was super sad, except for this arborvitae. Completely unbothered. It looked happy as can be, and therefore it was dubbed the Golden Child. So we really love this plant, virtually zero maintenance and perfect for these sort of smaller spots. And then next is Golden Duchess, which is an Eastern hemlock. This is a wonderful statement plant, but it's going to be 3 to 4 feet tall by about 3 to 5 feet wide. So really nice and small for these spaces. Great backdrop for perennials and other color. And then, in the winter and fall, it really is the star of the show because it has that golden yellow foliage.
It has a really nice shape too, with very little fuss or muss.
Yeah, that nice cascading form is
Yeah.
really quite
Yeah.
lovely. And then next is Enchanted Forest. This one is called Impish Elf. This is a Pieris. Pieris has like really beautiful, glossy, deep green evergreen foliage. And then in the late winter, early spring, you have these bright pink flowers and a lot of them. So planting them now will really give you a huge payout really early in the season. This particular selection, the Enchanted Forest collection, has shown really great resistance to azalea lace bugs, which can be a huge problem for Pieris. So if you have problems with lace bugs, this would be a good one for you to grow. And then next is another evergreen, but this is called Crown Shine Osmanthus. Really beautiful rounded form with that toothy small foliage. Gives a really unique texture to the garden, and it's quite glossy as well. In the spring, we love it for its small but fragrant white flowers that it produces.
It's a nice surprise.
Yeah, it really is. And then lastly is another new plant that I really love. It's called Butterscotch Baby Spirea. Spirea, this is totally different. It's so small. It's about, 1.5 feet tall by 1.5 feet wide. So it's really quite tiny, more of a mushroom shape and habit. Perfect for tucking into these awkward spaces. What I really love about this is its vibrant butterscotch color. So it puts on this intense butterscotch glow in the fall and then again in the spring. So this is one that you plant it now, you get fall instant payoff, and then you get spring payoff again, which is great.
And it has really pretty flowers too in the spring.
It does, yeah. It'll flower all throughout the summer. It's this beautiful pink flower.
Yeah, really lovely. And I think of it as also almost looking, you said mushroom, but I feel like it's almost like a larger bowling ball. and the golden child arborvitae is similar, just the form of that these take are really the form is beautiful. Okay. Planting in mass, that's one of my favorite tricks in the garden actually, is taking a plant that is beautiful, and the more you plant of it, you create this sweeping hedge like the roses on the right, or a drift of plants that it's instantly soothing, like grasses, planting a what I call a drift of them. Those are great design tricks and tools in the garden, and it's a really good time. Fall is a great time to do that, to get them, as we said, a little more established for spring. So you've chosen a really nice selection, and kind of some surprises in here about what would be great to plant in mass.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can think to plant in mass. And one of those, we talked about Pittosporum, the dwarf variety. This is more of an upright. It's called Gold Coast. It's a brand new plant we introduced this year. It has really unique lime green foliage, this rather irregular green margin, and then a pale creamy veination. So you get this really cool tricolor look. Small glossy foliage, just a really striking plant for mass. I'd like to think of it as like evergreen hedging, as I had mentioned I was going to do in my garden, for that airy texture. And then it does have a dark, almost black stem. So you get this cool contrast alongside that too. And then roses can be really neat in mass, especially these more sprawling ground cover type roses. Nitty Gritty is our collection of ground cover roses. They are wonderful, 3 feet tall by 4 feet wide or so. They self-clean. They repeat bloom throughout the summer. They have really healthy, highly glossy foliage. We trial all of our roses extensively before we ever introduce them. And Nitty Gritties have performed well throughout the country, even in South Georgia, where the heat and humidity is extreme and the black spot is prolific. These have done really well. And I really love the peachy color on the peach rose, and it does have a subtle, nice fragrance to it as well.
And clearly you love it because it's your backdrop too.
It's true.
But yeah, this color is so different and distinctive. And I think the more the merrier when it comes to planting nitty gritty.
I totally agree. And it has a nice little almost yellow center sometimes to it, which is really kind of cool. And then next is Hypericum, Floralberry Sangria. This is another fantastic choice here. I love the deep dark green foliage, the cheerful summer yellow flowers that are going to attract the pollinators. And then once the flowers are done, persistent red berry that's quite large sticks around, and it hangs onto the plant for quite some time. So really beautiful plant, excellent rust resistance, which can sometimes be an issue with these Hypericums. This particular series was originally bred for the cut flower market. So what that means for you in your garden is that when you cut the berries, they last for a really long time. So they're great for cut flower arrangements. They're going to be about 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide.
Yeah, that one really has year-round beauty in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, and they're a fast grower, so they're going to reflesh really quickly. So if you cut them, they reflesh really quickly, flower, and then produce more berries. So they really just continue. And then next is Agapanthus. This is a really super compact Agapanthus, maybe a foot tall, and the flowers are prolific and they're bright white. So this would be a really interesting, maybe front of the border plant, planted in mass. There's lots of interesting ways you could use this. And I really like how compact it is and just how covered it gets in flowers. And then next is salvia. So I really love the idea of mass planting salvia and other perennial colors of these big, like almost rivers of color. And dark matter is a fantastic new salvia variety. It is the largest flower that we've seen in salvia. It creates this almost, I call it a fuzzy flower, but it really has this large, wide, thick flower with this amazing deep blue color. It's also earlier to bloom than some of the other cultivars. So if you plant it now, you'd get a really great color display earlier than other salvias would. So really beautiful, and it does rebloom. So you'll get an early flower, and then it'll flower again for you in the summer. And then, of course, sedge or grasses, anything like that, that just creates a lot of movement and texture. Ice dance is a great one because it has that bright green leaf and a creamy white margin.
Yeah, that's another one that I want in my garden as well. The bridal veil agapanthus, I think when anybody sees that in person, they don't realize right away that it's an agapanthus. It's so unique. It's compact habit. It's the fact that it's covered in blooms. It's really a standout. Okay, so if you were gonna just treat yourself to something fantastic and to enjoy in spring, and maybe we can pick our favorites after you go through this, because I know what I'm thinking about adding. I'm running out of room in my garden to add all the things that I'm excited about, but I love the palette on this slide too, actually. Just makes me feel really excited. So these are like treat yourself plants. Georgia, take us through one by one.
Yeah, so hopefully there's something for everyone here in this palette. First, we're starting with a ground cover. So if you're in the camp like I am, which is you'd rather have a dense, vigorous ground cover than weed your garden.
That's me.
Yeah. Blueberry muffin ajuga is a great plant for that. So this is extremely vigorous. It has blue flowers that just cover the plant in spring to early summer. The leaves are thicker and more weather resistant. They're less likely to get mildews on them. And they also have these beautiful chocolatey brown hues to it. So it appears sort of dark, which gives a really nice contrast to the flowers themselves. But a nice vigorous grower, if you plant it now, it can sort of take its time and spread. And in the spring, you could have a nice little ground cover. And then one of my favorites is the evergreen clematis. This is as the name would suggest, an evergreen vine. It's going to flower in the earliest parts of spring. So in my garden, it's like the first thing that flowers, and it always makes me excited. The flowers are bright white. There's so many of them, and they're extremely fragrant. So really great plants for planting around the patio or close to the house. And then because it's an evergreen, it's really nice for privacy also, and it's super vigorous. So it's quick to fill in. You could really, you could plant this on a trellis or some sort of screen, and it would fill in really quickly for you. And then hellebore, of course, ice and roses is such an improvement on the standard hellebore that we all know and love. Ice and roses has a deep green foliage that is strong and robust, and it doesn't tatter or doesn't need to be cut away because it looks kind of frumpy. This is really beautiful foliage. It's going to look good throughout the year, even when the plant's not in flower. And then instead of the flowers hanging down like a traditional hellebore would, the ice and roses flowers are going to face upward. So you're really going to be able to see the plant. And especially since hellebores, sometimes for some of you, they're the first flowers in the spring. They're peeking up out through the snow, as Kathleen mentioned in her garden. That's what they do. And when those flowers are facing up, that's going to be a really big difference in how beautiful that display is for you. And then next is Summer Soul Arabian Jasmine. This has extra large, fully double flowers that smell amazing. And if you're in the climate for them, they bloom nearly year round. So fantastic plant. It's also evergreen. It's a, 6-foot tall shrub by about 4 feet wide. Really nice addition to a garden. Or if you aren't lucky enough to be in an area where it's hardy, it's great for containers and it can be overwintered indoors as well. And then we talked about planting our blueberry and our fruit trees. It's also a great time to plant your blackberries, other caneberry type plants. So Superlicious is a fantastic new variety of blackberry. I really love this because it's a compact size, 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. It has excellent flavor and it's thornless, which makes it so much easier to harvest the berries on a thornless plant. And then lastly is Jurassic Gold Wood Fern. So if you plant this now in the spring, when it emerges, it's going to emerge this bright golden orange color. It's super vibrant, super beautiful. It's much more colorful and a much stronger color than some of these other autumn ferns that you can find. So a really nice way to bring some excitement to your shady gardens.
So I'm just, if there's a garden word for salivating, that's what I'm doing looking at all of these. Summer Soul, there's a little typo there. It's Summer Soul, Arabian Jasmine. That one I love because it sort of makes me think back to this idea of creating a paradise idea in the Garden of Relaxation. That's a wonderful one. And the fragrance is just amazing. So it's hard to choose, but I would choose that one. If you were going to plant one of these in your garden, Georgia, what would you plant?
I think I'd have to go with the hellebore.
Oh,
I think it's just so different. And, a 2-year-old plant in the garden is just completely covered in flowers.
okay.
And the foliage is so awesome when it's not in flower. It's a really great plant.
Wow. And Kathleen, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. As you guys can tell, I have the t-shirt that says #zone envy, but this is one thing that I just adore. But I would love to be able to plant Summer Soul. I have seen it in person. It is gorgeous and smells beautiful. So
Yeah.
there's my 2-part answer.
All right. Well, those are on our wish lists. So that concludes our talk about, plants. But I did want to let people know, if you haven't already seen this guide, our Simply Beautiful guide to fall planting came out a couple of weeks ago to get, gear us up for fall. And one of the great things about it is there's 3 plans in there, and then each plan has 3 different plants that you can choose for each type of plant in the garden. So like, for instance, that plan entryway, Eden, thinking about front yard spaces, we have like 3 different choices for a taller shrub and 3 different choices for, sort of a low grower next to the door. So you can find that booklet online now. If you go to our website, it is right under the Be Inspired part of our website. It's under planning guides. So you would click on planning guides and go all the way to the bottom, and you'll see the Simply Beautiful booklet. If you didn't see it in your email before, that's how to get it. So I think we have some time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some great questions today and wanted to toss a couple of them your way. One of them, Katie, I'll toss this to you. We've had lots of questions about people wanting specific information on plants for specific areas. Can you tell us how they can get ideas on Monrovia.com?
Well, I would definitely suggest going to my plant finder, and let me just go back to the screen I was on. You can find that when you go to our website. If you click on My Plant Finder, you'll see some choices, type in your zone and maybe a few, filters like water use, sun exposure. But there's other filters. You can filter it for color. You can filter it for, height. So that's a great way to find plants for where you live that are suited for your design needs. It's a really great resource. So check out My Plant Finder.
It really is a great resource. It's going to give you so many more ideas and suggestions for things you might not even be thinking about. So I use it all the time and love it. Another question, I'm going to send this to both of you guys. We had a lot of questions about water-wise plants and kind of on both ends of the spectrum, but specifically a water-wise grass. Do each of you have a favorite water-wise grass?
Gonna let Georgia start while I think.
Stump the panelists.
Yeah, there's so many options of water-wise grasses. I really love little blue stem. It's a great plant. A lot of them are native to the prairies and they're used to those sort of dry, open, exposed areas. So I really love little blue stem. There's a really great Black Hawks, which is a cool new variety. It gets really dark, and there you go, behind Kathleen. Yep. So that would be my answer.
I would say, it's actually a chorus, Japanese chorus, which I'm not sure you wouldn't call it a grass, but it has this sort of grassy-like texture in my garden, and it's pretty neglected. It's in the shade, but I don't really water it. After it got established, it's just, it's sort of on its own. So, yeah, I would recommend that. But another grass that I'm thinking of is Blonde Ambition, Georgia. I think that one's pretty drought tolerant as well.
It is, yeah. That's a grandma grass, I believe, and it is pretty drought tolerant. And
I love the plumes. That's such a fun grass. So that's the other one that comes to mind.
Yeah, we talk about planting in mass, and I gotta say that's one of my favorite plants in mass. Just the movement and the plumes, the little mustache plumes is what it looks like.
And I love the name. I just think that's a great name for a plant. It has a lot of ambition.
It really is. Lots of questions, like I said, about watering, but specifically about watering in the fall. And I know it's different depending on where you are in the country, but you had talked about echinacea especially. Can you tell us why adequate water in the fall is so important, Georgia?
Yeah, totally. Well, it's important because if you think about, you're getting them ready to survive the winter, and a lot of the winter growth is all happening below ground. So for planting in the fall, it's actually really great for watering because they need less. The plants are growing less and have, there's not as much dry, hot sun. And so if you give them a good thorough soaking in the fall, it'll really set them up through the winter, where you will pretty much be sort of hands off. And then they'll be ready to thrive with less water in the spring and summer.
Absolutely. Well, we do still have a few questions coming in, so our experts will be answering those. Katie, I know that we had talked about the Grow Beautifully newsletter, and that is one of the things that people can get a heads up on all the information that's coming out. So tell us how we can get that information.
Well, yeah, if you're not already signed up for the Grow Beautifully newsletter, I strongly suggest getting on our list, because that's where you'll find out about new plant introductions, first. And it's where you'll see our downloadable, guides that you can use to help your garden design planning. And then, you can look for some, other opportunities, like ordering, online for, this fall, for next spring. So really, it allows you sort of a sneak peek, first peek at a lot of what we're up to in growing plants. So I strongly suggest that. And you get a newsletter at the first Thursday of every month. And then you also, if you're subscribed to that, get some other, special plant insights along the way. So yeah, I think, and we don't share the list with anybody, and we don't spam you heavily. So I strongly encourage you to subscribe.
Sounds good. Well, I think that's what we have for today. So thank you everyone for joining us. You will be receiving a link to today's presentation very soon. That link will also include plant information. If you're enjoying our webinars, please tell a friend, and you can catch up on past conversations on our YouTube channel. So thank you both so much.
Thanks everyone for joining
Thank
us, and
you.
happy fall planting.